This is Federalist 26, Part 2. This is second paragraph. The idea of restraining the legislative authority in the means of providing for the national defense is one of those refinements which owe their origin to a zeal for liberty more ardent than enlightened. So he's focused on zeal for liberty more ardent than enlightened. In other words, some people, some of our critics, are so drunk with the idea of having as much liberty as they want that they are not enlightened to realize that you have to have a balance. Balance between liberty, securing liberty, and also the authority you give to the government to defend those for you, to keep them secure, whether it's from external enemies or from internal uprising and insurrections. So he says there should be a balance for it, but some people are not enlightened enough to see this balance. We have seen, however, that it has not had thus far an extensive prevalency, that even in this country where it made its first appearance, Pennsylvania and North Carolina are the only two states by which it has been in any degree patronized. Remember, we mentioned that North Carolina and Pennsylvania were the two states that had advised. Remember, they'd used the word out. Advised for the state not to have a standing army. But everywhere else in the other states, if there were standing armies, they had to be under the civil authority. In other words, civilians had to, one way or another, had to give it okay. So keep this in mind as we go forward, that only two states had said we ought not to have standing armies in time of peace. And in one of the videos, I told you the difference between using ought not, and shall not. Shall not is a definite no. Don't even think about it. But ought not is more like advising. So keep that in mind as we go forward. And that all the others have refused to give it the least countenance, wisely judging that confidence must be placed somewhere, that the necessity of doing it is implied in the very act of delegating power, and that it is better to hazard the abuse of that confidence than to embarrass the government and endanger the public safety by impolitic restrictions on the legislative authority. Impolitic means unwise. And embarrass, again, it's not in the sense we use it today. It kind of makes to disable the government, embarrass the government, or to make it weak. The opponents of the proposed Constitution combat, in this respect, the general decision of America. And instead of being taught by experience the propriety of correcting any extremes into which we may have heretofore run, they appear disposed to conduct us into others still more dangerous and more extravagant, as if the tone of government had been found too high or too rigid. The doctrines they teach are calculated to induce us to depress or to relax it by expedients which, upon other occasions, have been condemned or forborne. It may be affirmed without the imputation of invective that if the principles they inculcate on various points could so far obtain as to become the popular creed, they would utterly unfit the people of this country for any species of government whatever. But a danger of this kind is not to be apprehended. The citizens of America have too much discernment to be argued into anarchy. And I am much mistaken if experience has not wrought a deep and solemn conviction in the public mind that greater energy of government is essential to the welfare and prosperity of the community. So our opponents are saying things that are not logical. They want you to go to militia to defend their rights, and we've talked about this idea is a bad idea, it's a scary idea, it's an unwise idea. And at the end of the paragraph, he says, luckily, Americans have had enough experience in these past few years to see that depending only on the militia is wrong, because the Revolutionary War experience taught us a lesson. Because we had to ask for other countries, he doesn't mention it, France to help us. Otherwise, we could not have won the war. Then in the next paragraph, it may not be amiss in this place concisely to remark the origin and progress of the idea, which aims at the execution of military establishments in times of peace. Though in speculative minds it may rise from a contemplation of the nature and tendency of such institutions, fortified by the events that have happened in other ages and countries, yet as a national sentiment, it must be traced to those habits of thinking which we derive from the nation from whom the inhabitants of these states have in general sprung. Okay, he says, well, this subject has become important enough, the idea of standing armies that we've been talking about, that it's good to reflect on it, find out what its history is, where we get it from. Why are we even talking about it here? He says, well, one way we can look at it is look at the history of different countries like we have in some of these past Federalist Papers. But he says, if you really want to find out why we are talking about it, since majority of our people, majority of Americans now, at that time had come from England, Britain. He says, let's find out what happened in Great Britain that the idea of a standing army being under the control or being under the supervision of civilian powers, which is the parliament, that the standing army should be under the control of the parliament. We should start talking about its history so that things become clearer to us, so we have an intelligent conversation, so that we can, at the end of the day, balance authority with rights. Remember, it says power and privilege. Okay, we'll continue in the next video. I just wanted to again remind you that these are some of the better known historians of the early American history, the founding era, and I have mentioned it, and I'm going to do it again, remind you that first of all, you have to have a book in front of you or have the text of the Federalist in front of you as you listen to me or as you listen to anybody read it for the first time. And then the best thing to do is either read the books by these authors, if your language skills are at a point where you could do that, or what you could do is to listen to a lot of their talks. They've given a lot of lectures and talks and conversations with others about their books, about history. And you can find them online, on C-SPAN, on YouTube, on all other websites, Vimeo, and the websites of different historical societies like National Archives of the United States, National Constitution Center, Library of Congress, and I've already mentioned C-SPAN, of course. So let's look at, in the next video, let's look at the history of England, just a short look at the history of England, and see how the idea of the standing army was looked upon there.